Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be doing a little bit of a box office preview for Spider-Man No Way Home. We're still waiting on the last of the official box office projections for the domestic opening coming from Box Office Pro. Typically that comes out sometime between today and tomorrow, and obviously we'll get updates for those numbers as we get the Thursday night premiere numbers. I personally have my own ticket to go see it, and I can say that the movie theater I'm going to has so many showtimes. Many of them are filled to capacity, and they even have showtimes going all the way up until 2 a.m., which I have not seen in a very, very long time. So it just once again brings up that question of, okay, can we really blame the pandemic for every single film that has lost money this year? I would say, yeah, to an extent, but really no, because if a film is out that people actually want to go see, people will end up going to go see it, and there have been plenty examples from this past year. But we do have some early box office indications for Spider-Man No Way Home, and we finally have an official budget for this film, which is going to help us figure out exactly what the break-even point for this movie is going to be. So before going any further, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So apologies again for the voice, still recovering from baby Thor continuing to bring sickness home to me. But we have this article here from Deadline which says that Spider-Man No Way Home's global box office is to sling a minimum of $290 million in its opening. Now that is huge. Huge. That is the biggest opening that we will have seen during the pandemic era, and it is an early indication of why me and many others are speculating that this film is going to be able to reach $1 billion to be the first film to cross the $1 billion mark during the pandemic era, and is going to be one of the most profitable films of this past year. And I say one of the most profitable films only because of the fact that, one, this film's budget is officially now reported to be $200 million, and I'll go ahead and update this chart for y'all. And with a $200 million production budget, which is not only reported by Deadline, but also there are other reports reporting this as well. Because of that, and because of typical marketing cost, and again, these are typical, it could obviously be a lot higher for a film like this, especially a film that they're trying to really get people to go out to see. One could argue that it's a higher number, but because we don't actually know the actual specific number, we're just going to go by what is a standard, what is an industry standard number here. It means the total cost with marketing is around $300 million, taking into account that the studios get about 60% of the box office returns by the end of their run. It means that the break-even point for this film is around $500 million. So definitely one of the higher break-even numbers of this year. We've obviously seen some that have been even a little bit higher than this, No Time to Die being a great example of that. But when it comes to this type of break-even number, very few films have actually been able to reach this number that have had to reach it. Obviously, I believe very firmly that Spider-Man No Way Home will not only be able to pass this number, but also even double it, getting about $1 billion. Now, the big question, of course, is, okay, well, what does this mean then for Disney in the long run? Because obviously Disney has had about $400+ million of financial loss from the box office alone this year. And so really the answer to that is, even if this film gets $1 billion, they only get 25% of the actual net profit. So not 25% of $1 billion, because remember, the $1 billion is not taking into account how much actually goes to the studios and how much actually goes to the theaters that they're splitting that with, or with the Communist Party in China, for instance. So when we look at that number, we have to always keep those things into account. And so really, when you talk about the fact that they only get 60% of the raw box office number by the end of its run, and after that, when you look at the net profit of the entirety of the film, you then remind yourself that Sony gets 75% because, spoiler alert, and trigger warning, this is a Sony movie, this is a Sony product, because they get 75% of the actual profits because they ponied up 75% of the production budget, whereas Disney only put up 25%. If you take into account the 25% that Disney is going to get from this, even if this film gets to $1 billion, you then take into account the fact that it does not get 60% of that. You then also have to subtract, right, the amount of money that it costs to actually make this movie. And then you start to realize, okay, the cut that Disney's going to get from this might add up to about $100 million, which is still a good 300 plus million shy of the amount of money they would need to make to actually make up for their financial losses at the box office this year. So even though this film is spelling really good news for the likes of Sony, for Disney, it's definitely better than nothing, but it is definitely not necessarily going to be enough to keep them from their financial hole as far as the box office is concerned. So let's go ahead and dive into this article here from Deadline. And obviously, they're going to make some assumptions about what this film is going to do. And here's the thing. They're going to look at this film, and many people are going to look at this film as a sign that the box office is back, that people are going to go back into their movie-going habits. Whereas for me, I look at this in a much more realistic fashion, which is to say, no, all this is going to show and prove is that the pandemic has been used as an excuse for going on years now, and there have been films, there have been cases of movies that have been able to show that it's not necessarily the pandemic, it's not necessarily the theater closure, it's what are the movies that are going to drive people to actually go out and see it. And what we've seen from the pandemic times is that people are now a little bit more careful as far as what they spend their money on. When you look at the fact that people were put out of their jobs for months, people were put on furlough, people were put just out of the job altogether, what you had was not just people being terrified to go out, not just people who couldn't go because of theaters being closed, but people who are a lot more aware of how much money they spent week on to week on, and being a lot more careful with how they spent that money. And they started to realize just how much money it cost to go see a movie in a theater, let alone pay for popcorn, drinks, etc. And so, therefore, you had a lot of people who were saying, you know what? I'm not going to go out and spend a crap ton of money that I really shouldn't be spending on a movie when I could easily just wait the 45-day theatrical window or whatever theatrical window a film has in order for it to be available on streaming, or just wait for it to be a day-and-date model like HBO Max had with their Warner Brothers releases as well. And so those are really a lot more realistic as far as why people have not been going to see movies and why there are some films that people have been willing to go see and have actually been making some profits at the box office because of that. So I just wanted to put that out there because obviously they are going to really try and push this as a return to the box office form. But for me, it's no, this is just a movie that people have been waiting for, really want to see, has been really well marketed, has really been pushing a lot of the speculation, a lot of the questions, and also, obviously, I believe that it's going to be pushing a lot of the nostalgia because of the rumors around, obviously, I have not seen the film yet, and I do not want anyone to put any spoilers out there for this film until it actually gets released. So, the fact that there are certain people who might be attached to the film obviously is creating a lot of buzz for it. That's why this film is going to do well, and it has very little to do with the actual pandemic response because of it. And what I'll be doing in my box office breakdowns is comparing this to other Spider-Man releases, because if this Spider-Man film not just breaks $1 billion during the pandemic era, but also if it goes toe-to-toe with previous Spider-Man releases, that to me is going to be proof positive that the pandemic excuse just does not hold much water at all, and instead it's much more of a condemnation of modern-day Hollywood and the films that they are putting out and how people are being a lot more smart when it comes to their money. So anyway, going into this, it says, the hope here is that Sony's theatrical window respecting release not only jolts the worldwide cinema attendee population back into seats as they head into 2022, but also makes movie-going habit, once again for the masses. Again, kind of already explained why that is not really true. No holiday distraction, Los Angeles weekend rainstorm, or alarmist news headlines will prevent people from heading out, especially the box office most reliable 18 to 34 crowd. Read on. Yes. Why? Because it's a film that people actually want to go see. So just because this is a film that people want to go see does not mean every other film that gets released after this film is going to have the same impact. It goes on. When all is said and done, Spider-Man No Way Home will have been a fight well worth having and settling between Sony and Disney. The latter, who co-financed this $200 million sequel, so there is our budget there, at 25%, will also have Tom Holland's web slinger appear in another Disney MCU film. So again, MCU film, they will actually get this character to appear in, but as it says there, they only get 25% because it's a Sony movie. I don't know why that is still a controversial statement to say. The multiverse tee-up or culmination, either description works, set off rolling audience screams at last night's world premiere at Westwood at various MCU and Sony Marvel cameos. Spoiler alert, Doctor Strange is one of them. Obviously, he's in the trailer. The pick is already 97% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, which we all know means nothing, ranking as the best reviewed Sony live-action Spider-Man movie to date. Oh, wait, what is that? Sony live-action Spider-Man? Yeah, that's right, because it's a Sony property. It goes on. Fans are expecting a smart sequel that raises the stakes in a way that no other Spider-Man has. They're happily going to get what they've been asking for. There's arguably more action in No Way Home than Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings, which I think is kind of ironic, and it's certainly easier to follow and has more heart than the Byzantine plotted Eternals, which, remember, is a big financial disaster. Note that any movie destined to gross north of $100 million on tracking, there's a great standard of deviation given the small sampling of box office numbers. So, what that basically is trying to point out is that even though the expectations for this film are incredibly high, do not be surprised if it comes in underneath those expectations. And that's kind of where I'm standing too. A lot of these box office projections are being based off pre-sales because that's pretty much the only metric that we have. The issue with pre-sales, and I mentioned this before, I had a whole video dedicated to pre-sales, so go ahead and check that out. Basically pointing out that when you talk about pre-sales, great example of why pre-sales are not the entire story are films like Solo: A Star Wars Story. That movie also was outpacing various films that ultimately did much better than it did. However, because that is a metric that sometimes people use and is oftentimes a big factor in the projections that people make, when people don't show up on the actual day of the film or word of mouth is really bad, and so people don't show up on the Saturday and Sunday of a release, that has an overall impact. The reason why this film, I think, is going to fare a little bit better is because the buzz for this film is just so incredibly high, whereas the buzz for Solo really wasn't all that there in the first place. To have a Han Solo film without Harrison Ford already was kind of a hard sell to begin with. This obviously is in a much different camp altogether, but it still does bring up that very good point about as far as, projections go and why pre-sales don't really mean that much. As far as its US Canada prospects go, Sony is seeing at least $130 million at 4,300 screens. Sony is seeing that. And Thursday preview starting very early at 3 p.m. with all strength in IMAX and PLF screens. Rivals and tracking see the opening much higher in the 175 range and possibly $200 million. So this film could open to $200 million domestically. If this film opens to $200 million domestically, it will have surpassed the vast majority of big budget releases to come out this year and will be on pace to easily beat the highest grossing domestic releases of 2021. Easily. And Shang-Chi obviously is at the top of that list domestically, and this film by its second week will have easily surpassed it, and it would not surprise me if it doesn't. Though everyone is high because No Way Home is the biggest movie they've seen on tracking for quite some time, revenues numerically to big December openers like months number 2, Star Wars: The Last Jedi back in 2017, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, 177 million 2019, and Rogue One, 155 million. So what's interesting here as far as domestic openings are concerned is that when you break this down to this month specifically, we're talking about a film during the pandemic era, which could, one, easily surpass a film like Rogue One, 2, could even pass Rise of Skywalker, and could even give The Last Jedi a run for its money. But it's the pandemic era. So this, again, kind of shows you why that whole pandemic excuse can only really bring you so far. It goes on. Sony in recent years has never been a studio to get over their skis in box office projections. Better to underpromise and overdeliver. But seriously, anything emulating or besting the $90 million pandemic opening record of the Culver City Lots of Venom, Let There Be Carnage is pretty darn good. To date, Sony's biggest domestic opening belongs to 2007 Spider-Man 3, which made $151.1 million. So this likely will be able to surpass that. And again, guess what? During the pandemic era. What do you know? It goes on to say, overseas projections are between $160 and $180 million. These numbers come with COVID codicils for sure. This week's No Way Home rollout starts Wednesday, notably in Korea, UK, France, Russia, Mexico, Italy. Joining the opening suite through Friday are Germany, Brazil, Netherlands, India, Spain, among others. No Way Home does not yet have a China date and is unlikely to slot in before the end of 2021. And to be honest, this film doesn't seem like it would even need China necessarily to break $1 billion. Why do I say that? Well, let's look at these numbers. So they're saying that this film could make upwards of $200 million domestically. It's also saying that the overall for this film is around $160, $180 million internationally. If this film gets to $200 million domestically and $150 million internationally, or again, some version of those two, we're talking about a film that could open to $350 million. If it opens to $350 million, that alone puts it well on pace, especially as we enter the holiday season, to basically have $1 billion within its reach, even without China. You add communist China to that mix, and obviously at that point it becomes kind of a done deal. But I don't even think they would really need China at this point. And to be honest, if they were actually going to be an ethical company, they would just say, screw China, screw the Chinese Communist Party, who's going to take the vast majority of the profits anyway, and use them to fund things like the Uyghur concentration camps. I always want to remind people of that. And instead just say, hey, we'll make massive profits even without working with those commies. But I did want to share this bit of news with everybody because I think it is pretty huge. This is a film. Again, they say at minimum will open to $290 million. We'll see just how close that is. As I said, many of the projections have been off this year. Many have either, estimated or underestimated. For me, it seems that the hype is pretty real just based on my own local area, but obviously that is not everything. It's going to be very interesting to follow and track this movie, though, because it is definitely going to be, no doubt, the biggest film of this year. I do not suspect that this film is going to be able to really have any competition whatsoever from any of the other releases to come out, even during the pandemic era. I think it's going to easily surpass films like Fast and Furious 9 and also No Time to Die. But the question, of course, is how much money is it going to make? So what do you think the global box office is going to be? Do you think it's going to be the minimum 290, or do you think it'll be closer to 350? For me, I'm kind of looking closer to 350, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I'm never really into making, bold projections before we actually get raw data. I'm all about actually having the data, crunching the data that we actually have available. But it is nice to actually finally have a production budget that we can work with. $500 million is the magic number for this film in order for it to break even. And also as a reminder, this is a Sony film, and Disney only gets 25% of the actual profits once it reaches the point of profitability, which it has to cross the $500 million to actually do. So what are your thoughts? Do you think it's going to reach $290 million or more in the global box office? Also, what do you think the domestic number is going to be? Let me know in the comment section below, especially that pinned comment at the very top. Thank you all for watching. Please make sure you smash that like button, lap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my December Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members. Animation commentator Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dolores Ed, Dion, Father Christopher Miller, Hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Hannibal Grimm, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeff Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyles 79, Laura, The Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson ×4, Mitch Dunaway, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody, Mondo Spieler, On to June, Orange Chat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ullen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, and Tina Bojan, and of course, the Empress of the Universe, Tina B. Thank you very much for being my Patreon members. And for my Subscribe Star members, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stan 4, John B., Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. Thank you very much for supporting me on Subscribestar. And to my 4 members over on Locals.com, Kara Tharp, UAB Mad Dog, once again, Mike Jackson, Bifford a Hobbit, and Robert Barnes. Thank you for supporting me on Locals. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, check out the top link in the video description below. It's called Willow or .w.lo, Willow link. It'll bring you to all of my social media platforms and also to all of the various other locations that you can support the channel. You can get access to things like giveaways, where I do giveaways of 4K films, 4K steelbooks, digital codes, all kinds of stuff every single month. Also, there's a level where you get access to all of that, plus an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where you also get to ask questions that we will answer on every episode of the podcast. And at the final level, you also have the ability, the Chosen of Valhalla level, you have the ability to have all of that, plus in your first month, get a free t-shirt of your choice, any color, sent anywhere in the world, and also you get to be featured once a month on the Chosen of Valhalla live stream featured on the main channel. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the description. You're all amazing and beautiful people. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.